Go. Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Every week, we bring you the stories of people who are making the world better locally, globally, and digitally. We're part of a service organization, Rotary International, over 1 million people in 36,000 clubs around the world who find ways to improve the lives of others by bringing together their time, talent, energy, treasure, and humor. All right. I think it's important for us to kind of be in that space that we find the fun ways to make a difference in the lives of others. As you listen to what we're talking about today, the different take we may have on today's topic, know that 52 weeks a year we're sharing these kinds of talks, and we hope that you will take an interest in our YouTube channel or our podcast series and tell your friends about it as well. Today we have with us Tim Allen of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He is the principal engineer, a title we may talk about in a little bit more detail later. I fairly recently was looking at some different materials on AI. I saw his talk given at DjangoCon, which you may have to explain for us, some months back, and thought, I think this would be a great guy to have visit us on the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley Speaker Series. And Tim, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you, and I hand the mic over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. So this is Don't Get Pulled Under by the AI Hype Wave. And I'll dive right in with who I am. I'm Timothy Allen. I'm a principal engineer at Wharton Research Data Services at the Wharton School, as you just mentioned. But please feel free to call me Tim. I'm a member of the Python Software Foundation and the Django Software Foundation. I'm a core team member of Wagtail, a content management system written in Python and Django, and I'm a DjangoCon US organizer. I organize the Philadelphia Python Users Group and Barcamp Philadelphia, among other endeavors. I've been writing code since 1980 when I was 6 years old. So I live and breathe technology, and I have my whole life. And over these years, I've seen a lot of tech trends. I've been closely involved in a few of these overhyped trends, and I've contributed to that hype myself in the past. So I'm hoping I can share some of the mistakes I've made in the past so we can all learn and avoid some potentially dangerous pitfalls. Since I've been immersed in technology my whole life, I've seen these patterns repeat themselves. And the first primitive AI programs I used were in the late 1980s, based off the ELIZA program, which was developed at MIT in the 1960s, which was basically a program that was put together as a virtual therapist in which you could type in at a text prompt and it would analyze your sentence and try to figure out what the most important word was and repeat it back to you like a therapist was. And this was so convincing to people back in the 1960s and the 1970s that an effect was coined called the ELIZA effect, which is the tendency to project human traits such as experience, semantic comprehension, or empathy into computer programs that have a textual interface. This effect is a category mistake that arises when the computer's symbolic computations are described through terms such as think, know, or understand. And that's the Wikipedia definition of the ELIZA effect. But doesn't that sound kind of familiar to what we're doing with AI right now? So I think it's important in contexts like these to remember our history. And, recently a July 2023 report from KPMG, the Professional Services Organization, found that 97% of the 200 senior US business leaders it polled anticipate that generative AI will have a huge impact on their organizations in the short term. 93% believe it will provide value to their business, but 80% believe it will disrupt their industry. And it's this kind of thinking that allows tech bros, the folks who were really into blockchain about 18 months ago and are now suddenly all about AI, to dominate the media cycles. And we've got to stop falling for that, because this level of hype blocks us from improving the human condition with technology. And while there are definitely useful technologies and techniques emerging, the combination of hype and fear makes it impossible to find the true utility of new technologies. And I keep putting AI in quotation marks because it isn't artificial intelligence. We're really talking about three different technologies that are developing and evolving. The first are predictive models. These are used for forecasting. By looking at data from past events, we can best predict what will happen in the future. And we've heard about these for years anytime there's a hurricane, with the American model versus the European model. The second are causal models, which are used for explaining why things have happened. They analyze large amounts of data to determine cause and effect. But what we're hearing about in the absurd wave of hype are generative models, which generate a response to input, typically from a text prompt. They generate responses by using a random seed and prediction engine to find the next most likely words or actions to create output by having analyzed a mammoth swath of data to create a decision tree. And these have existed for decades. AI is not a technical term, it is a marketing term. These models are advanced and have parameter counts in the billions, but let me be clear, they are not artificial and they are not intelligent. Recently, Linus Torvalds, creator of Linux and Git, quipped, "It's hilarious to watch. Maybe I'll be replaced by an AI model." For anybody who's used GitHub Copilot, I think it is obvious that this isn't happening anytime soon. He continued, "Let's wait 10 years and see where it actually goes before we make all these crazy announcements. Anything that makes our tools smarter is a good thing, but be careful of the AI BS." And he didn't mean beautiful science. This is what the hypesters call generative AI, although if you want to be accurate, they are machine learning models. And all of this is just a subset of what may someday be called artificial intelligence. This chart is from a 2010 paper outlining the different fields which may someday come together to make AI. As you can see, there are many fields which must coalesce to achieve the dream of artificial intelligence. And even then, it is likely a misnomer. We have to stop giving human attributes to machine learning models. It is dangerous. Here's one example. Right now, it is very popular for AI folks to say that models hallucinate. We hear it all the time right now in the media. This removes responsibility for algorithm coders and model traders. The models don't hallucinate. They make stuff up because a programmer using a random generation function decided they should. The pressure of the market to make sure that these text generation algorithms do not say, "I don't know," is so high that they're being irresponsible. Their responses are frequently inaccurate, laughably so, but it really isn't funny when you consider concerns like bias. We are already seeing real-world consequences of this, driving us further away from a collective shared truth. By saying they hallucinate, we are removing the responsibility of the programmer and the model trainer to be ethical. I've been using GitHub Copilot for coding for several months now, and it is often more trouble than it's worth. After the initial wow factor wore off, and there was a wow factor, I've been most amazed by how wrong it can be a lot of the time, sometimes dangerously so. Because the machine learning models behind GitHub Copilot have been programmed to lie or make things up instead of saying, "I don't know," they're now making up packages and libraries that don't exist. We already have major issues with our software supply chain being poisoned, as we saw a couple months ago with the social engineering hack on the Linux compression utility XZ, which made international news. And these lies from GitHub Copilot have been shown to be repeatable, causing a major attack vector for hackers to exploit. Find the package name that's being invented by the machine learning models, and then deploy your poison code. We're making it way too easy. And this is much worse than copying and pasting code you don't understand from Stack Overflow. This is the Gartner hype cycle for emerging technologies in 2023. Generative AI, which again is really machine learning models, is at the peak of inflated expectations. This peak of inflated expectations, aka Mount Hype, is higher than any I've seen in my 40 years in technology. The curve of the Gartner hype cycle chart is incredibly similar to another. This is the curve of the Dunning-Kruger effect. These two charts being close to identical is not a coincidence. The Dunning-Kruger effect has shown that people with limited competence overestimate their abilities, while high performers tend to underestimate their skill. We're at a bit of a crisis point in the United States. Our education system has left a sizable portion of our population behind. And the unfortunate truth is this portion of the population is easily misled. We saw this in the 2016 election with the effect that foreign actors using troll farms had in seeding divisive content within American social networks. This was before the recent AI explosion, and I fear what's coming our way in the rest of the 2024 election cycle. Regardless of your political persuasion, I think we can all agree as Americans, we don't want Putin and Xi to regularly have their thumb on the scale. And, if you're viewing us from an international audience, you know what effect American elections have on the world as a whole. We have made ourselves easy targets for our adversaries to divide and conquer, and have yet to develop a defense against this new weapon we've developed. This list is just a microcosm of the overhyped tech trends that I've witnessed throughout the years. All of these eventually became useful tools in the technology toolbox in one way or another, but didn't live up to the hype, sometimes laughably so. And only the media benefited from hyping up the technology to the peak of Mount Hype and then tearing the same technology down during its descent into the trough of disillusionment, sometimes only a few months later. This is the Google Trends chart, search chart for artificial intelligence, Second Life, and cryptocurrency. That red bump in 2006 to 2008 is Second Life and its search peak, which is dwarfed by the more recent trends of crypto and AI. And the higher the peak of Mount Hype, the harder the fall. But let's talk about Second Life for a moment. Second Life is a continuous virtual world that has been available to the public since 2003. It is still profitable. I was one of the first users. And I believe it is the closest thing anyone has come to creating the metaverse that was described by Neil Stephenson in his book Snow Crash when he coined the term. The amount of hype it got in the mid-2000s was amazing. It was featured on the cover of Business Week, with a multi-article feature inside featuring yours truly. Reuters had a bureau within Second Life with a dedicated reporter, and IBM was all over it. At the time, I accidentally started a company called SL Boutique on a dare. A company called the Electric Sheep Company bought it from me after a year. The Electric Sheep Company had received over $7 million in angel investment funds from CBS Viacom. And the CEO of the Electric Sheep Company, Sibley Verbeck, was appearing on stage with Les Moonves, the CBS CEO. It was absolute insanity. While running SL Boutique, I became the first person to sell real-world items for a virtual currency. We sold computer monitors and NVIDIA video cards for Linden dollars, the currency in Second Life. Yet I didn't have the foresight to buy NVIDIA stock back then. The Guardian and MTV both covered this, and the hype level was insane. The Electric Sheep Company did an episode of CSI New York with CBS that won an Emmy. Events as mainstream as a Jay-Z performance on Jimmy Kimmel's late night talk show were simulcast in virtual arenas. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game had a presence in Second Life when Ryan Howard won the Home Run Derby. And the colorful 3D landscape was talked up as the future face of commerce, advertising, job recruiting, and even dating. Then the hype died down. The media had been treating Second Life as its darling and completely turned on it. And most people today haven't thought about Second Life for 15 years after it had its 18 months in the sun, yet it is still out there and profitable. Let's look at a more recent example, though, fresh in our memories. Here's a simple 3-step process. Find the social media account of someone overhoping AI. Scroll back 18 months in their social media feed and see all of their tweets overhyping blockchain or crypto. Bitcoin was started in 2009, and the first Bitcoin transaction for a tangible asset occurred on May 22nd, 2010. 2 Papa John's pizzas were delivered for 10,000 Bitcoin, or $680 million at the height of Bitcoin's value. 340 million per pizza. But the hype didn't really start until a few years later. In 2017, companies started putting blockchain or Bitcoin into their names just to increase their stock value. Tulip Biomed changed their company name to Bitcoin Services, and its stock increased by 42,500% during 2017, from 2 cents to 42 cents. Now it is worth just over 2 cents a share. And during the 2022 Super Bowl, crypto and blockchain reached such a fever pitch, with Coinbase, Crypto.com, and FTX buying spots, including the infamous QR code ad spot. Coinbase's stock has since plunged over 90%. Crypto.com had Matt Damon calling people wusses and encouraging people to buy, and those people would have lost an average of 50% of their investment. And then there's FTX. How's that going? FTX collapsed 9 months after the Super Bowl ad in November 2022 after solvency concerns involving their trading firm. This shook the already volatile crypto market, causing losses in the billions. This caused a liquidity crisis and a desperate search for bailout funds, with rival exchange Binance considering buying portions of the company. But they quickly backed out. And within a few days, FTX's Sam Bankman-Fried bailed and the company filed for bankruptcy. Within a few hours, FTX was hacked and hundreds of millions more worth of tokens were stolen. Bankman-Fried was eventually arrested in the Bahamas, brought to the US, put on trial, and found guilty. Mining crypto took so much energy that the only place to actually make a profit soon after Bitcoin was launched, was in Iceland, where geothermal electricity makes the utility basically free. We started to talk about the environmental cost of crypto, but that environmental cost is dwarfed by training these AI models. Microsoft's latest sustainability report showed a 30% year-over-year increase in water usage. That's 1.7 billion with a B, more gallons used in just 1 year. This is an OpenAI data center owned by Microsoft in Des Moines, Iowa. Due to the mammoth increase in water usage, the local water utility, West Des Moines Waterworks, will no longer consider future data center construction in the area, despite the massive boon for employment it meant, unless Microsoft can significantly decrease their water usage, as it is already affecting the local drinking water availability in a poor neighborhood. Microsoft is investing huge sums of money in GPU farms to train these LLMs on content they do not own and do not have permission to use, while starting to spend less money on their people. This has always been a huge flag for me when a company starts to spend more on its technology than it does on its people. And at some point, we're going to have to ask ourselves, is it worth it for what right now amounts to a glorified spell check and grammar check? Let's revisit this trend chart. In the red around 2006, you see Second Life, which was a huge amount of hype, but it pales in comparison to how stupid we've gotten over crypto, and now even worse with quote unquote AI. And so has the spend and the environmental impact, as you can see from this chart, on what Microsoft, Amazon, and Alphabet have collectively spent on their cloud server costs between 2020 and 2024. It's almost doubled. So with the current hype around AI, we face a far more dangerous problem than we faced with Second Life, crypto, blockchain, or any of the other tech bro-driven trends of the past several decades. We already face a problem with a shared collective truth that is driving humanity farther to extremes. And in 2016, I witnessed an election here in the United States that was decided by less than 80,000 votes across 3 states. And I'm convinced at least 80,000 votes were swayed by troll farms created by bad foreign actors to increase the amount of outrage about what are really non-issues, using lies, fear, and deceit. We're now into the middle of another election cycle, and it feels like we're wholly unprepared. The social media and traditional media companies continue to be complicit, as outrage is good for their bottom line. More clicks for more ads, more money for them. We've already heard a deepfake of Joe Biden during the New Hampshire primary, mimicking his voice to encourage people not to vote. Thinking that these models, AI, are knowledgeable or meaningful is actively dangerous. They have been trained on vast swaths of misinformation available on the internet. This will further push us away from any kind of collective truth. Tech companies are actively using LLMs now to give answers to people seeking knowledge online. We know that these LLMs frequently give the exact opposite of the truth. And now some are suggesting we use them as a teaching aid? The release notes of OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 a few years back included the bullet point, less likely to make up facts. Pause and think about that sentence. You cannot be less likely to make up facts. A fact is truth. You cannot be less likely to make up facts. This risks these falsehoods becoming part of the permanent record, blocking the path between humanity and more legitimate, testable sources of information. We risk the line of truth becoming so blurred it is invisible. There is some hope on the horizon. The federal government is starting to move. Although the same companies that were begging for regulation a couple months ago are suddenly resisting now that it might actually happen. Call me shocked. And we're still being asked to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Ultimately, my hope is that sunlight may prove to be the best disinfectant. and that we can start to have some real conversations without the fanboy driven hype to find the true utility of this technology, because there is certainly a there. It's just impossible to separate the wheat from the chaff right now. The signal cannot get through the noise. So I don't have any easy answers, but I know as technologists we should be responsible stewards and we must do better. Thank you very much. I also just wanted to say I've cut quite a bit from this talk, so if you'd like to see a longer version, there are two vintages on my YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/flipperpa. But for now, I'd love to hear what you all have to say, and thanks so much for having me.
Excellent, Tim. Thank you very much. I am excited to jump into questions because I don't know, I put together a long list myself. And to the group that we've got with us, feel free to add questions to the chat or let me know in the chat that you want to ask a question, and we'll be able to go from there. I'm gonna start with one of the core elements of the danger of AI, which a term we'll use because there has to be a term, right? And that is that the pressure is on to come up with an answer, as opposed to I don't know. Isn't it rather difficult in terms of logic and programming for any algorithm to be able to know that it does not know? Or is there just some kind of threshold that allows making that the better choice?
It absolutely is. It's a challenge, especially with the way that these LLMs are set up. However, we're starting to see that the pressure brought on by these falsehoods and bias are having their own effect. More and more of the modern LLM releases are now having, they're calling it creativity mode. Like, how creative do you want it to be? In other words, how much do you want it to lie? Because some people have said that, hallucination, as they're calling it, is a feature, not a bug. And you're starting to see LLMs that release now with a dial, like how creative do you want it to be? So the possibilities are there to use less of the random seed generation and more actual source verification, which I think the default should be much more towards source verification than what's been done in the past. The pressure was being brought on by the race for venture capital to never have it say that I don't know. And that to me is dangerous. I would much rather, if you're going to have it in this creative mode, I think it should be much more forthright with saying, oh, this answer might be total BS. I've done a lot of invention here to give you an answer. I also think that as we get into LLMs, which are better at citing their sources and their decision path, that will be in a much better place, which is also a big concern for copyright, right? So right now, for example, the estate of Harlan Ellison has a lawsuit open. Everybody knows about the New York Times one, but let's talk about the estate of Harlan Ellison. All 33 of his works were gobbled up by OpenAI in training ChatGPT without any permission given or even asking. And the estate of Harlan Ellison has sued OpenAI. Let's say that they win that lawsuit. It's not as easy as a DMCA. In the past, we've seen, if somebody puts copyrighted material up on YouTube, a DMCA is filed, and YouTube can just remove that DMCA. To remove Harlan Ellison's work, the way things are set up right now, they have to retrain that entire model at the cost of millions and millions of dollars to remove his work from the decision tree, from the training source, because it's been baked into those billions of parameters in that decision tree. So it's a much more expensive, costly proposition. So I think we're going to see down the road LLMs that are developed that it's going to be trickier to follow that decision tree and report back both the decision tree and the sources for repeatability. But I think we're going to start to see pressure to see technologies developed where especially in research, reproducibility is the number one thing you want within research, right? So being able to follow that same decision tree that the LLM has gone through that one time, and also cite all sources, I think is going to be a direction that we head in, which will let us verify down the road. And at that point, I think we'll have a much more useful tool.
So one of the tricks for getting a more useful tool is having that ability to be nuanced about the value of the work that you have. So, whether this is a good tool for education really has a lot to do with how the student has been trained to think about the output of an LLM or a dictionary or whatever it might be, right? And if what we're trying to do is to get into that space of helping the user better understand, I would guess that one of the things that you're drawing attention to with terms like hallucination is that we're anthropomorphizing the technology. Isn't the word lie in exactly the same space, in that that's something that humans do? Humans hallucinate, humans lie. And that's not to say that there's a problem with the argument, but are we even able to really talk about this in a way that isn't so convoluted in terms of our language, that we can be accurate about it?
It is tough. The line I try to draw is when we start to remove moral and ethical responsibility from companies. And, I think there was an episode of The Office where Michael Scott is all angry at technology and computers. And to prove a point, he's following the GPS and he follows it and drives the car into a lake because the computer told him to do it. So that's the kind of example of sort of the moral and ethical ambiguity that I'm trying to bring attention to. You're absolutely right that terms like lie are also human terms. Make up falsehoods might be a better way of putting it, and it is tricky given the limited tool set of language that we have here to come up with terms to discuss it. But I think it's very important to point out when a company might be using terminology to skirt responsibility for what they're actually doing. And there's been, there's been so many cases where there's a race going on right now, right? We're at the peak of Mount Hype, and you've got Microsoft and Google and Apple a little bit far behind, and Amazon are all doing whatever they can to get the most out of this hype cycle possible for their stock price for various other reasons. And I think terms like hallucinate especially are being used to skirt what is some of the responsible way we have to develop technology. So that's why I brought it up. And Rory has just asked me if there have been any lawsuits over AI. There are quite a few out there right now. I think one of the biggest ones right now is the New York Times versus OpenAI. And in it, it's a pretty damning lawsuit if you look at it. The New York Times has certain examples where they have queried OpenAI and it has returned basically word for word New York Times articles without any kind of attribution. OpenAI claims that this was because the people using the prompt engineers at the New York Times were prompting it in such a way that it confused the algorithm. But that's kind of a dog stole my homework argument to me. Or more recently, I guess my wife did it is the current popular go-to. And I just think it's going to be interesting to see how these lawsuits play out. And also how federal regulation comes into play over the next couple months and years. Because there's certainly there. And I think that, a little more responsibility could go a long way in actually improving the utility of these products. The race to the bottom may not be helpful in the long term here. I think we see some tech companies in the race for the day losing sight of the month and the year ahead. We're seeing a lot of penny wise, dollar stupid behavior within the industry. And I think if people took a little bit more of a long-term view on what was going on with these LLMs and took a step back instead of constantly racing to get the newest version out right away, that we may see, it may not be that the industry leader on day one is the one who comes out in the end with the best possible product. So we'll see. I don't have a crystal ball to see the future, but I think it's up to technologists to be responsible with what we develop, because there are real world consequences that we're already starting to see.
Speaking of real world consequences, Chris asked a question in the chat, which is I would say both blunt but very much on with regard to the kind of fears that people do have about how these technologies can be used, and that's is building a Terminator possible one day?
Well, I think that's pretty far off from where we're at. I try to raise questions and awareness of new technologies. But on the flip side of that coin, I don't know if you've seen in the news, but there are now robotic dogs carrying rifles, which are being looked at by the U.S. military. And one of the things, I actually said this in our Wharton computing chat soon after, GPT released in November of 2022, version 3.5, and set off this entire hype wave, was that, the last thing we should probably do as a species is apply military applications to this technology, but I bet it's the first thing we're going to do because if we don't do it, they will. And here we are already. It's a shame because you look at the current situation in the Middle East and the tragedy with the aid workers from Global World Kitchen. It came out that that was a misidentification by AI in that bombing and in an algorithm that was used. And there are real world consequences here, which are devastating. And that's an extreme example, but the everyday examples that we're already seeing are, um, you know, the vast majority of jobs that are applied for now are done through an online application system. And these are reviewed typically by algorithms, which are now, being called under the AI label, and have been shown repeatedly to display bias, to favor white people over all other races. And, these are things we really need to look at and grapple with as a society. Because I remember, I'm old enough to remember it was an Apple IIe, and I was in sixth or seventh grade, and a new technology had come out called Mockingbird. And it was the first time I heard a computer talk to me. You could type in at a command line and make it say things back to you through digitized speech. And I remember being 11 or 12 years old and just being absolutely blown away by this technology and thinking about all the applications it could have for the world and that we were getting closer. I was reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for the first time and thinking we were getting closer to Marvin the Paranoid Android. And a year or two after that was the first time that I had a microphone and could say something to a computer and see it come up on the screen. What have those technologies been used for more than anything? They've been used to make customer service a pain in all of our necks, right? So now you have to call up, tell me why you're calling me. Da, 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 da. To get through to Comcast, it takes 20 minutes of dancing through phone menu hell to get an actual person that can do anything, because they don't empower these computers to do anything. They do it to block customer service when you have somewhat of a monopoly on a service. And the two biggest offenders are ISPs and airlines, because they have a virtual monopoly depending on where you want to go, where you are and where you want to go, or who can provide your internet service. There isn't true choice in those, and they have leveraged this voice technology that I had huge dreams for in more than any way through frustration, such that there's an actual website now called getahuman.com that tells you how to navigate these hellish phone menus to get an actual human who can help you with the service. And I worry that that's going to be, the predominant application of AI. We already see it. To get anything done with Amazon customer service, you have to go through a chat bot and answer, 8 to 9 minutes of questions before you can get a human that will actually say, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you the exact same thing I just told the damn computer. I checked the front for my package. I checked the back for my package. You didn't deliver it. Okay, we'll redeliver it. Well, that's 20 minutes of my time I'm not going to get back. And how many people, just find their own way and drop off. It ends up being profit for the company, and people end up getting the short end of the stick.
So, on the list of about 20 questions that I've got, I'm going to pick one more just to stay within the time frame. But one of the phrases you used in your presentation was one that in many ways describes the hope of the members of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, right? And you talked about how hype gets in the way of improving the human condition with technology. And so as problematic as many of the human applications of this interesting algorithmic technology may be, I'm sure that you are also seeing some things that have surprised you over the last year in terms of the possibilities for making a difference in some positive fashion. Do you want to speak to a couple of those?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the big things I'm seeing right now is real-time captioning and the leaps forward we've seen in that. And that level of accessibility, especially at tech conferences and things like that, has been a wonderful thing to see. I still, prefer human captioners. They do a great job. Every year at DjangoCon US. For those who don't know what Django is, I'll just give a 30-second background. Django is the most popular web framework for the Python programming language. So you might not know what Django is, but you've used it. It powers Instagram, it powers Discuss, Pinterest, the Washington Post, NASA, Google's blog. They all use Django. So it powers a fair amount of the internet. And at DjangoCon, we're big on inclusivity. And, I've used captioners for years, which I think we'll continue to do. But for organizations that don't sort of have a nonprofit behind them and don't have the financial resources, the ability to do real-time captioning and real-time translation to other languages would just improve the accessibility for communication across the world. And I think the applications there will be wonderful. I think the potential applications for tutoring are absolutely wonderful down the road. If we can be sure that we put some guardrails on them for the safety and education of our kids, because the last thing you want, as somebody who's written distance learning portals for kids, they get very creative and are the best hackers in the world. So there's a ton of possibility here. I am not anti-LLM or anti-technology. I've been an early adopter of just about every technology I've seen, but I've seen enough to know when things are going to be problematic. And if we don't get on the right side of this, I could see it being much more of a hindrance to the advancement of our species and the good of the world than a help. And I want to make sure that it heads in the positive direction.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank you for your presentation and your time, but also for the nuance that you bring to the terminology and the exploration. That's really, really good. We had Eric Goldman speak to us some months ago from Santa Clara University about IP and AI, and it was another one of those talks that really allowed for a depth we don't normally get to see in the mainstream media. So thank you for that. A thank you goes to everyone who has taken their time to watch this recording. You may have caught this via our YouTube channel, via Spotify or one of our other podcast kind of avenues as well. And however you did it, we hope that you will share with others the kind of messages that you feel are intriguing you, that you find compelling, that are discussion prompts for you and those you work with, those that you care for and love, and that you'll keep coming back. You can find us on the web at siliconvalleyrotary.com, or if that's too big a mouthful, rotary.cool. Yep, that'll work. So as we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. And Tim, I am happy to hand it back to you. How shall we finish this recording?
I just want people to remember that we can have real conversations about this without sort of that fanboy-driven hype. And it really is up to us to continue that conversation and make sure that we drive this in a positive direction, because there is undeniably something cool behind the curtain here. But I think if we all work together, we can make sure that we continue to keep it moving in an ethical and accountable direction. And thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. And everyone, we will see you next week.